What do you get when you take a guy who almost went pro in baseball, ship him off to a Russian acting conservatory where they treat emotional breakdowns like homework, and then hand him some of the angriest, saddest, most beloved characters in modern television and film? Well, you get Jon Bernthal. This is a guy who's been killed off one of the biggest shows on television, gunned down more people on screen than most actual action stars combined, and somehow still comes across as the most decent, most human actor working today. He's been a vigilante with a skull painted on his chest, a warrior standing next to actual Greek gods, and a genuine piece of the biggest superhero franchise on the planet. And through all of it, he's never really changed. He's just gotten more people to notice. So today, we want to shine some light on the career of an actor who built an entire career on playing broken men without ever losing himself in the process. This is the story of Jon Bernthal. Jon Bernthal was born in Washington, D.C. in 1976. His father was an attorney, his mother worked in social services, and by all accounts, young Bernthal was expected to follow a fairly traditional path. Spoiler alert, he did not. His brother Nicholas went on to become an orthopedic surgeon, a totally different kind of high-stakes career. Jon had other plans, he just didn't know it yet. Because as a kid, his real obsession wasn't acting at all. It was baseball. Bernthal played competitively through high school and into college. Good enough that he genuinely believed it could become his career. But that dream ended the way a lot of athletic dreams do, with an injury that made the decision for him. He's talked about it since as one of those gut punch moments where the thing you built your entire identity around just isn't coming back, and suddenly you have to figure out who you are without it. So he pivoted hard. After deciding to leave Skidmore College before finishing his undergraduate degree, Bernthal did something almost no aspiring actor even considers. Following the advice of an acting teacher, he moved to Russia. He enrolled at the Moscow Art Theater School, one of the most demanding and historically important acting programs on the planet. He spent years there, training in a language that wasn't his own, studying a discipline that treats acting less like a performance and more like an excavation of the self. It's the kind of formative experience that explains a lot about the actor he became, because Bernthal doesn't really do performances, he does people. Now, Bernthal came back to the US in the mid-2000s and did what almost every actor with serious training and zero name recognition has to do. He took whatever came his way, guest spots on shows like Boston Legal and CSI Miami, a series' regular role in a short-lived ensemble sitcom called The Class, bit parts that barely register on a resume today, but paid the bills back then. He wasn't being picky, and he definitely wasn't being discovered. He was just working, the way actors have to work before anyone notices them, one unremarkable scene at a time. But here's the thing, what kept him afloat wasn't luck. It was that Moscow training quietly doing its job. Directors and casting agents who worked with him early on kept coming back to the exact same word, intense. Bernthal didn't read for auditions the way most actors did. He showed up already inhabiting the character, sometimes to the visible discomfort of everyone in the room. It wasn't a party trick. It was just how he'd been trained to work, and eventually, that intensity found the exact role it was built for. In 2010, AMC was developing a zombie drama based on a moderately known comic book series. Nobody involved really expected it to become a cultural phenomenon. Bernthal was cast as Shane Walt, the best friend and former partner of the show's lead, a man left to care for his best friend's wife and son after everyone assumes that friend is dead, only for the friend to come back and unravel everything Shane thought he'd earned. It's hard to overstate how big The Walking Dead became, and how central Bernthal's performance was to making those early seasons actually work. Shane wasn't just a simple villain, he was a genuinely good man slowly corroded by grief, jealousy, and the kind of moral erosion that every good survival story is built on. Bernthal played every stage of that decay with a rawness that made Shane one of the most talked about characters on television. People loved him, then feared him, then mourned him. By the time his character was killed off at the end of season 2, Bernthal had gone from unknown character actor to a name people were actively Googling. And then, it just ended. Unlike the usual Hollywood rumors of behind-the-scenes drama, his exit was entirely planned. Shane's early demise was always in the cards, staying true to the original comic books. Bernthal has even talked about how close he was with the cast and crew, shedding tears on his last day on set. For a lot of actors, getting written off the biggest show on television after just 2 seasons would be a career-ending disaster. For Bernthal, it turned out to be the beginning of something much bigger, though at the time it definitely didn't feel that way. What Bernthal did next is exactly what separates the actors who fade out after their big TV moment from the ones who actually build careers. He didn't go chasing another lead role just to prove a point. He went right back to being a working character actor, and he took it dead seriously. In 2011, he showed up in Rampart alongside Woody Harrelson, playing a corrupt cop in a film that barely made a dent at the box office, but earned him serious respect in the right circles. A couple of years later, he popped up in Snitch with Dwayne Johnson, another supporting role, another quiet flex of his craft. Then came the film that really started reshaping how Hollywood saw him. Martin Scorsese cast him in The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, playing Brad, a volatile drug-dealing associate of Leonardo DiCaprio's Jordan Belfort. Bernthal only had a handful of scenes, but he did what he'd already proven he could do on The Walking Dead. He stole every single one of them. From there, the roles kept getting bigger and stranger, and Bernthal kept saying yes to basically anything that let him disappear into somebody else. In 2014, he played a tank gunner alongside Brad Pitt in David Ayer's Fury, one of the most physically demanding roles of his career, with the cast reportedly living inside the actual tank for weeks just to build that claustrophobic, brotherly tension the film needed. In 2015, he showed up in Sicario as a cartel-connected cop in one of the film's most jarring, unforgettable sequences. In 2016, he took a small but pivotal role in The Accountant opposite Ben Affleck. By 2017, Bernthal had quietly become one of those actors whose name in the credits instantly made a film feel more serious. That year alone, he appeared in Wind River, Baby Driver, Shot Caller, and Pilgrimage, 4 wildly different projects, 4 completely different men. In Shot Caller, he lost a significant amount of weight and then packed on prison yard muscle to play a white-collar family man transformed by years inside a maximum security system. It's the kind of physical and emotional transformation critics singled out as one of the most committed performances of his career up to that point. It never got the mainstream attention of his bigger franchise work, but ask any hardcore Bernthal fan and they'll tell you it's some of his best acting, full stop. Around this same stretch, he also showed a much gentler side, playing a warm, working-class fisherman in 2019's The Peanut Butter Falcon. It's a film that finally let audiences see the softness underneath all that coiled-up intensity, which is a good reminder of something people tend to forget. Bernthal has spent just as much energy playing kindness as he has playing rage. He's just a lot more famous for the rage. But if there's one single role that defines Jon Bernthal in the public imagination, it's Frank Castle, the Punisher. Bernthal was cast in 2016 to appear in the 2nd season of Netflix's Daredevil as Frank Castle, a former Marine whose entire family gets murdered right in front of him, sending him on a one-man war against the criminal underworld of New York City. On paper, it was a supporting role in somebody else's show. In practice, Bernthal walked away with the entire thing. His Frank Castle wasn't some cartoonish vigilante with a skull on his chest and a quip in his mouth. He was a broken man carrying grief like a physical weight, someone whose violence felt less like heroism and more like a slow-motion suicide he couldn't quite finish. It was so effective that Marvel and Netflix greenlit a standalone Punisher series almost immediately. The Punisher ran for 2 seasons, from 2017 to 2019, and it became something genuinely unusual for a comic book adaptation. It found a passionate, deeply loyal fan base, especially within military and law enforcement communities, a lot of whom saw their own experiences with trauma, isolation, and moral injury reflected back at them with a level of honesty superhero TV almost never bothers with. Bernthal took that responsibility seriously. He's spoken at length about meeting real veterans, sitting with their stories, and trying to honor the weight of what he was portraying instead of turning it into empty spectacle. It's part of why, even years after the show ended, the character has kept a cultural footprint that outlasted its own cancellation. Netflix pulled the plug on the Marvel shows in 2018 and 2019, and for a while, it genuinely looked like Frank Castle might be done for good. but characters this beloved rarely stay buried for long. Bernthal returned to the role for a handful of episodes of Daredevil, Born Again on Disney+, and then went even further in 2026 with The Punisher, One Last Kill, a standalone special that Bernthal himself helped write, alongside director Ronaldo Marcus Green. Bernthal also consulted closely with Marine veterans like Nick Koumalatzos to ensure the psychological reality of the character remained authentic. Bernthal has called it the darkest, most psychologically complex version of the character he's ever gotten to play. And by most accounts, that's exactly what fans got. In 2018, he appeared in Steve McQueen's Widows. In 2019, he joined the ensemble of Ford vs. Ferrari, playing real-life Ford executive Lee Iacocca alongside Christian Bale and Matt Damon, a film that earned Oscar nominations and reminded audiences he could hold his own in a true prestige drama without leaning on physical intensity at all. In 2021, he showed up in David Chase's The Many Saints of Newark, The Sopranos prequel, and that same year played tennis coach Rick Maxey in King Richard, the Will Smith-led biopic about the rise of Venus and Serena Williams, a role that showed off a genuinely different register for him, warm, talkative, almost goofy. A world away from Frank Castle's silence, he also headlined We Own This City in 2022, an HBO limited series from David Simon, the creator of The Wire, playing a corrupt Baltimore police sergeant in a story about institutional rot. Critics called it some of the best television of that year, and Bernthal's performance was singled out as the anchor holding the whole thing together. He even showed up for a memorable single-scene cameo in FX's The Bear, one of those blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearances that fans still bring up because of how much weight he packed into so little screen time. He also got to revisit an old character years later, reprising his role as Braxton, the mysterious hitman/brother from The Accountant, in The Accountant 2 alongside Ben Affleck. What started as a small, almost throwaway supporting turn back in 2016 turned into a full-blown buddy action showcase nearly a decade later, and it's honestly one of the more fun, loose performances of his career. Braxton is chaotic, funny, unpredictable, everything Frank Castle isn't, and it's a good reminder that Bernthal doesn't just do grim and broken. He can do genuinely entertaining, scene-stealing chaos just as easily. Critics and fans alike pointed to the Affleck-Bernthal chemistry as the real engine of the sequel, proof that even in a legacy sequel nobody was demanding, Bernthal found a way to make it worth watching. It's a genuinely strange, sprawling filmography when you lay it all out like that. Corrupt cops, war heroes, vigilantes, tennis coaches, mob bosses, gentle fishermen, but the through line never really changes. Whatever Jon Bernthal plays, he plays it like it's the only thing he's ever done. And that through line is exactly why Christopher Nolan came calling, because before Bernthal ever suited up for Marvel's biggest stage, he found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with actual gods. Nolan cast Bernthal in The Odyssey, his sprawling adaptation of Homer's epic, in a cast stacked with names like Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Robert Pattinson. In a film full of kings, gods, and mythic monsters, Bernthal was brought in to play one of Odysseus' soldiers, a battle-hardened member of the crew trying to survive the long, brutal road home from Troy. It's a smaller role on paper than Frank Castle or Shane Walsh, but it fits Bernthal's whole career philosophy perfectly. He's never needed to be the biggest name on the call sheet to leave a mark. Nolan is famously known for wanting practical, grounded performances even inside his most fantastical stories, and Bernthal is exactly the kind of actor built for that. Someone who can stand next to gods and monsters and still feel like the most human person in the frame. Early reactions to the film singled out Bernthal's scenes as some of the most quietly devastating in the whole movie. A soldier just trying to hold on to his humanity while the world around him spirals into myth and madness. It's the same trick he pulled on The Walking Dead and in The Punisher, just wearing bronze armor instead of a skull emblazoned vest. Give Bernthal a man buried under grief, exhaustion, or violence, and he will find the aching, breathing person underneath it every single time. And that brings us to the movie that finally put all of this on the biggest screen possible. For years, fans had wondered whether Bernthal's Frank Castle would ever cross over into the mainline Marvel Cinematic Universe, the version of Marvel that plays on thousands of screens worldwide instead of a streaming platform. A lot of casual moviegoers had honestly already forgotten existed. It felt like a long shot for a long time. the Punisher's ultra-violent, R-rated sensibility never seemed like a natural fit for the PG-13 world of Spider-Man and the Avengers. And then it happened anyway. Bernthal was cast as Frank Castle in Spider-Man: Brand New Day, director Destin Daniel Cretton's follow-up to the Tom Holland trilogy, marking the character's first ever appearance in a mainline Marvel Studios feature film. The casting news alone generated massive buzz, largely because of exactly how unlikely it seemed. Funny enough, Bernthal and Holland actually go back years before either of them ever wore their respective costumes, having worked together and helped each other prep audition tapes long before either had landed their now iconic roles. That real history shaped the film's whole approach to their dynamic, described by people involved as something like a big brother, little brother relationship, with Frank serving less as a villain and more as a warning. A glimpse of exactly what Peter Parker could become if he lets vigilantism swallow every other part of his life. Director Destin Daniel Cretton has talked about wanting Punisher's presence in the film to add complexity to both characters, a dark mirror rather than a simple obstacle. Bernthal, for his part, described Frank in this film as a man who has fully accepted the darkness he lives in. Someone with no illusions left about redemption for himself, but who still doesn't want to watch Peter walk the exact same road. In the lead-up to release, there was plenty of chatter about whether the character would need to be watered down for a family-friendly franchise, whether the ultra-violent Frank Castle fans fell in love with on Netflix could actually survive the tonal shift into a PG-13 world. He survived it. By most accounts, the film found a way to keep the character's teeth intact, even inside that softer rating. And the Frank and Peter dynamic became one of the most talked about elements of the entire movie once it hit theaters. Critics have pointed to their scenes together as some of the strongest in the film, praising how it uses Frank not as a typical antagonist, but as a genuine emotional gut check for Peter, a warning of exactly where his path could lead if he keeps choosing isolation over connection. It's the kind of casting gamble that could have gone sideways in about a dozen different ways, and instead became one of the film's defining highlights. For Bernthal, it's the culmination of something that had been quietly building for the better part of a decade. The character he made his own on a streaming platform most casual audiences never even watched had finally reached the biggest stage Hollywood has to offer. And it did it without losing what made the character worth caring about in the first place. There's a version of this story where Jon Bernthal never gets past being the guy who died on The Walking Dead. Plenty of actors have washed out of far bigger opportunities with far less to fall back on. Instead, Bernthal did something quieter, and honestly, a lot harder. He kept showing up. He took the supporting roles nobody remembers the names of, the small independent films that barely made any money, the prestige dramas that let him disappear into someone else's story instead of his own. He never chased the spotlight the way a lot of actors with his level of talent eventually do. He just let the work speak, over and over, until the industry had no choice but to listen. And when the role finally came along that matched everything he'd trained his whole life to do, playing a broken man carrying an unbearable weight, he didn't just play it once. He built a second, third, and now fourth chapter out of it, carrying Frank Castle from a Netflix supporting role to a standalone series, to a special he helped write himself, all the way to the biggest movie screen in the world. That's not luck. That's not one lucky casting call. That's 20 years of a guy quietly doing the work, on farms and in gyms and in Russian acting classrooms, long before anyone was paying attention. Jon Bernthal never really needed to be the biggest star in the room. He just needed to be the most honest one in it. And somehow, that's exactly what made him one of the biggest stars around.